The following message was given at Calvary Christian Fellowship in Colton, California. For more information about CCF, you can visit us on the web at ccfcolton.com. We thank you for taking the time to listen, and we pray that you'll be blessed as you study God's Word with us.
Esther 4, verse 10, Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, "Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went his way and did all according to all that Esther commanded him. The book of Esther contains the story of an exiled Jewish woman who has been chosen to replace a recently deposed queen. While God is not mentioned, His hand over human affairs in the first 2 chapters is obvious. Queen Esther is established. Our author shifts our attention now from the palace to the city gate. Let's turn back to where we left off, chapter 2, verse 19. When virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai, as when she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, 2 of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Now, if you thought that Ahasuerus would stop amassing concubines when Esther was crowned queen, think again. His harem continued to grow, and by the time that we come to this passage, Mordecai has become a fixture in the king's gate, the entrance to the palace. When you think of an ancient city gate, don't do as I once did and think it's just a simple chain link fence. Think of a complex, a maze of business offices which led into the citadel that were highly businesslike and very well secured by the army of Persia. In fact, the city gate that was found in Shushan by archaeologists some years ago was somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 plus feet high and 90 feet broad. So this was a very large area that Mordecai is sitting in. He is sitting there in some official capacity, more than likely an appointment made possible by the queen herself. Our author informs us here that the queen has withheld her personal information. Nobody knows that she's related to Mordecai or the people of God, as was the advice of her guardian. What is about to happen would not have happened if that relationship was public. I imagine Bigthan and Teresh would have been a bit more discreet in their planning had they known Mordecai's relationship to Esther. And we aren't told why, but these 2 eunuchs burst out in a rage against the king and were intent upon his destruction. When it says they were coming to lay hands on him, this is not for prayer. They wanted to assassinate the king. And Mordecai blew the whistle. And Esther made sure that he received credit for it. The two eunuchs received their penalties. When you read here that they were hung on a gallows, you and I believe, or we think about it in a Western sort of a context, where people brought out the rope and they were hung for wanting to have salsa made in, Los Angeles or whatever. El Paso. I forget where the thing was. But anyway, bring out the rope, right? Well, that's not the way the Persians did it. The Persians hung people through being impaled. So when you were shish kebabbed, that is how the Persians dealt with your issues. And in order to publicly discourage anyone from following any similar course of action. So these two guys were shish kebabbed in public. As for Mordecai, there isn't any fanfare or show of appreciation, which is quite odd considering the fact that the king's life was spared by his efforts. It's written in a book, and it's completely forgotten. Now, I wonder if you've ever had that experience where something you've done has deserved recognition, but then it wasn't recognized. Nothing happened by what you've done. Most people call that being a parent. But otherwise, you could also have this happen in the workplace or wherever else in your life, and you may wonder, why is it that this didn't make more noise in my life? How come this didn't promote me? How come this didn't work out in my favor? I want you to remember this moment. I want you to consider that God may be waiting for a better time and place to reward you. It's not all about you. You see, if God doesn't allow that recognition to happen at this moment, if He allows it rather to happen at this moment when you want it, then it's about you and about your own glory, your own fame. God wants it to be where He can use it for His glory and for His name. That's what He's working for in your life. So keep that in mind as we come into chapter 3. Because after these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Once the plot was discovered and foiled, the king promotes this man, Haman, whose name means magnificent. It's kind of funny because, remember, we talked about Mordecai's name being insignificant. Here's Haman's name, magnificent. It makes you wonder kind of what maybe he was thinking about the two different guys. Here's a magnificent piece that I want to promote. The insignificant, maybe not so much. Who knows if that might have been part of things. But Mordecai just saved his life, and there's hardly a mention. This man comes on the scene. Nothing is said of his exploits, but the king lifts him high anyway. It hardly seems fair. And we may not know what he did to deserve promotion, but we know who he was. Haman was a prince, the son of royalty, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite. The term Agag is a title for Amalekite royalty. King Saul was commanded by God to execute King Agag along with the Amalekites that he led in 1 Samuel chapter 15. God pronounced them an enemy perpetually. God set up a war between himself and the Amalekites, and Saul was to be the one to carry out the execution. But he failed to extinguish that pronounced enemy, interestingly, a type of the flesh. Later in Saul's history, an Amalekite will show up at his death. If we do not kill the desires of our flesh, they will rise up at another time with greater power. And here is Haman. In the meantime, Haman's ascension to power was startling. Whatever he did to deserve promotion prompted the king to command his servants to pay him homage. This wasn't the standard fare for the other princes. These servants were to bow down and reverence this particular prince, Haman. Can you imagine the scene as Haman is walking in through the gates into the king's royal palace? This guy who we don't know why he was promoted, but here he is. The king has said everybody's to bow and honor and reverence him. And he comes in and immediately bodies are falling right out in front of him, falling to the ground in front of him, paying him homage. All around him, all these little human beings are paying him respect. But Mordecai refused to offer such a response. So I can see the visual. I don't know if you can. You're walking in, and here's the scene. Just crowds of people, just like dominoes, falling out in front of him. And there's one guy in the corner who's just standing there. Not going to do it. Verse 3. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" Now it happened when they spoke to him daily that he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. If you have ever had a work companion continually shoot themselves in the foot, you've had conversations like this one, haven't you? You might remember a guy, somebody who's always late, always running in late. And you want to, why are you, come on, man, you like him. Come on, get with the program. Set your alarm earlier. Do you need me to call you? The king's servants liked Mordecai. He was a good guy. Their concern for him was voiced day after day. This wasn't an isolated one-time incident. This is the way Mordecai behaved every time Haman showed up. I can hear them whispering in the corridor, Mordecai, what's wrong with you? You know this is not a good thing that you're doing. No matter how they pressured him to reconsider, he wouldn't listen. Somewhere along the lines, it seems that Mordecai unveiled his reasoning. Jews were allowed to show proper respect to authorities. That isn't the issue. Some have surmised that Mordecai revealed the ancient hatred between the Amalekites and the Jews. He said somewhere along the line, perhaps, this guy and his whole group of people, they attacked us when we came out of the promised land in Exodus chapter 17. When we were coming out, they attacked the old and the tired that were in the back. And they've been our enemy ever since. And God has put our hearts against them for all time. In that whole moment, he exposed that he himself was a Jew, something he told Esther not to do. And all they remembered, you know how this goes, right? You tell the whole story to somebody, and all they remember is, oh, he said he was a Jew. So whatever the story was that he told all the king's servants, the only thing that came out was his nationality. Because that's what they reported to this man, Haman. They relay this information without the context. They reported it was because he was a Jew, and that brought everything into focus for Haman. After receiving this information, he kept seeing this insulting act. At one point, the servants saw that Mordecai wasn't bowing. It's not clear that necessarily Haman saw it. But once Haman was told, this was all he saw. Now, can you imagine this? I want you to think about this. If you were Haman, everyone else is bowing to you. There's one guy that's not. Are you going to be upset about that? Me, I'm happy if 99 out of 100 are bowing to me. I'll take that every day of the week. That's not bad. That would make me happy. That 100th guy, I said, well, I'm going to make up a story about him. Oh, well, he probably has a bad back or something. He probably can't physically do it, but he's doing it in his heart. Come on. Not so with Haman. Haman becomes so enraged, he goes, you know what, if I kill him, this is just going to happen everywhere I go. All the Jews are going to do this. Everywhere I go, they're all going to have this same attitude toward me. So why not just kill them all? Now, what an irrational act. This hatred of this group of people on earth. But yet it has been the same over and over and over again in Scripture. The Pharaoh, who tried to wipe out all the male children in Egypt. We look later on in history at Herod, who tried to kill all the babies in Bethlehem when he heard that there was a king that had been born, 2 years and under. Later on in our history, future to us, a person, we won't know his name, but his title is the Antichrist, who will one day transgress a covenant that he makes with the people of Israel, and he will seek out to destroy them. Every time. And here is another man with a campaign to destroy God's people, to put his hand upon them. Where else could this have originated but in the heart of Satan himself, who has always tried to destroy the people of God? I wonder how it's going to go. Verse 7. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman to determine the day and the month, until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there's a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it into the king's treasury. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the money and the people are given to you to do with them as seems good to you. There's an interesting time stamp here. Several that I would point out to you. First of all, this is 9 years since the beginning of the book of Esther. 9 years from verse 1 of chapter 1. 4 years have passed since Esther's been made queen. And just minutes have occurred since Mordecai's insult. Haman's people sought to determine their God's will with regard to the best time to pounce upon the Jews. They sought to establish this using what archaeologists have discovered were forms of dice. These pur, or the lot. And this is occurring in the first month of the Jews, a time when they are getting ready to celebrate the Passover. When is the Passover? Keep it in mind, the 14th of Nisan, the very first one. In the middle of all this, they have no idea, the Jewish people have no idea what new devilry is being proposed behind them. They don't know this is happening. They have not read the book of Esther. It's not out for publication. Nobody yet knows what's happening. They are preparing for Passover, and this decree is happening in a back room somewhere. When the die, the pur, was cast, it fell upon the 12th month, and Haman proceeded to outline his wicked plan to the king. And he begins by diminishing the people of Israel, but not by name. Did you notice that? There's a certain people. He didn't say the name, didn't say who they were. There's a certain group of people out here that you have. And he kind of says they're random. These are random people. They're scattered and dispersed. They're littered throughout the kingdom, and they're separate from everyone. They're hardly going to be missed. That's an interesting thing, isn't it, about hatred? It can't name the entity of the object of its hatred. He does everything he can to dehumanize, to make them insignificant, to speak of them as if they're nothing. They'll hardly even be missed by you. King, you're not going to worry about this. Remember, the king had 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. They're all throughout there. And if we get rid of them, you're really not even going to notice anything. Beside that, they lived in Persia, but not according to Persian law. Of course, what law were any of them breaking? There was one Jewish man who was breaking one command on principle. Now, the whole nation of the Jews are all lawbreakers. There's no profit in keeping them around. And if that wasn't enough, Haman was willing to fund the entire program. I want you to recall that a single talent of silver was equivalent to 75 pounds. A single talent, 75 pounds. Some of us who lift weights, that's more than they make those big plates out of. That's what I do know about that. 75 pounds, just one talent. He's willing to give 10,000 talents into the economic treasure chests. Historically, we talked about this last week. There were two battles that took a lot out of the Persian Empire's army war chest. Thermopylae, Artemisium, both of those battles took a lot of money out, and all the expansion efforts that King Xerxes, who is Ahasuerus, if you weren't here last week, there's a lot of history. We did a lot of that. You can pick up the 8-track. In any event, we are making our messages available on 8-track and on records now. It's really a great thing. Anyway, you can check out the MP3 later. But there were two battles, and what Xerxes is trying to do, he's trying to work his way into Greece. Just like Daniel's vision in chapter 2 of Daniel says, here comes the Persians, and now they're going to the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire is eventually going to take over. Then the Roman Empire is going to be there for a long time. Well, Xerxes is trying to do this. But those two battles took a lot of money out. Battles at sea cost a lot of money. So here comes Haman with this idea of, I'm just going to get rid of a bunch of random, insignificant people, and I'll pay you millions and millions and millions of dollars. A sudden influx of 10,000 talents would have been a tremendous economic boost. So the king signed off and gave the Jewish people supposedly into the hands of Haman. Isn't that interesting how the Bible records this? In the eyes of humanity, here are the men who make their plans. Here are the movers and the shakers, the most powerful man on the earth at this time. And he thinks he can transfer God's people into the hands of a madman as if he has the power to do that. And just like that, a backdoor deal has been made to wipe out the Jewish nation. They don't even know. They have no clue any of this is happening in the background. Verse 12, then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month. And a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language, in the name of King Ahasuerus. It was written and sealed with the king's signet ring. And the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and men and women, in one day on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being published for all people, that they should be ready for that day. The couriers went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan, the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city of Shushan was perplexed. So a few days later, and Haman's plot has become policy. It was sent to each province, recognized as official by the king's signet ring. And listen to the timing. The king's decree is written on the 13th day of Nisan. Any faithful Jews living within Persia are preparing to slaughter their lambs for Passover. That's when most of them received this news. God allowed this heathen king to decree a genocidal campaign against his people on the very day that his people were celebrating their deliverance from another guy who tried to wipe them out. There's something interesting in that. I wonder sometimes, we're all going to receive times of difficult news. Certainly nothing like this, I hope, for the most part. I'd hate one day for someone to say all good-looking Mexicans are to be killed. Don't worry, Dad, you'll be okay. But all good-looking Mexicans are going to be wiped out. I really do not look forward to a day like that. But it's fascinating how the Lord allows this news to come on this day when they are supposedly faithfully remembering God's deliverance. There's a grace in that. That He delivers this, that He allows this news to come out on a day when they're supposed to be thinking of the power of God. Now, I remind you of this. Have you ever had this happen where something comes up and you've just come through a Sunday morning service and you've just listened to a message on something and it really touched on an important truth that you needed to be reaffirmed in, and the next day you got a bad piece of news? Well, that message was your preparation for that news. God is building us up so that when we hear those things, we're ready with His Word. He's given us a message. He's put it in a time capsule. He's allowed it to happen at a certain time when you've learned a certain something so that it shouldn't faze you. It should be a reminder. God has worked in the past. God has answered this question before it even came up. You would think, at least in theory, that the message and the meaning behind the Passover would have given them strength of heart to know, no matter what this guy says, God is bigger than the Pharaoh. He's bigger than Xerxes. He'll be bigger than anybody else. In writing, though, the Persian people are given the authority to act against all Jewish people, regardless of age, sex, or gender, for this single day on the 13th of Adar, 11 months later. Isn't that interesting? They cast pur to their supposed gods. And God said, well, let me just put that on this day. The lot, I'm going to go ahead and work it out so that I have 11 months to work out my plan for this whole thing. Notice it wasn't like the next week. It wasn't a couple of days from now. Why not? This was supposedly the God's plan to destroy these people. I think not. I think it was God's plan to say, I've got 11 months to work out my plan. Not that God needs 11 months. You know who needs 11 months? We need 11 months. We need 11 months to be obedient and willing to do what God tells us to do. So just like that, Haman's getting his wish, Ahasuerus is getting his silver, and the people are getting confused. Those in the citadel were disturbed by the king's action. This reminds us that not every nation, not every member of every race is against another. There are many civil and godly Persians that love their Jewish neighbors. They can't figure out, why would I want to kill this man? That's not what they wanted. In chapter 4, then when Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was a great mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Mordecai didn't pull any punches. There's no way to miss this guy's response. He went all the way up to the gate. He couldn't go any further in, so he wasn't going to do his job, but he's sitting out there clothed in burlap. And for what you saw and what you heard and where you saw it, it was obvious that Mordecai was suffering greatly in hearing this news. Why? Well, certainly it was because of his people. He was concerned for the Jewish nation. But truthfully, I can also imagine him believing that he was responsible for drawing the enemy's fire. His refusal to bow had sparked the enemy's idea. And now that's not necessarily the truth. God used this to bring about this madman's dream. But can you imagine his guilt at feeling as if he was the one who brought this upon the whole Jewish nation? And everywhere you looked, there were Jews doing the same thing, joining him in his mourning. Mordecai was the local representative, the one that was there in Shushan, but all throughout the kingdom, there was fasting, weeping, and wailing. Verse 4, so Esther's maids and eunuch came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed. Then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and take his sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend her. And she gave him a command concerning Mordecai to learn what and why this was. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he might command her to go into the king to make supplication to him and to plead before him for her people. So Hathach returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. And Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court of the king, who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. When the queen heard of Mordecai's actions, she was in deep inner turmoil. She sent him some clothes, but he wouldn't accept them. Incredibly, you and I would think, because in our minds, if you're the queen, you're privy to all the information, right? But remember, the queen is right now in the middle of watching all these virgins getting kind of inspected and brought into the harem. The king is not communicating with her. The king doesn't want her opinion about which concubine to bring in. So she's not involved in the daily things of life. She's probably out in some oil field somewhere getting all dolled up for the next, you know what I mean? That's what they did. So she doesn't know. She has no idea what has taken place. She's out of the loop entirely. She has no idea what her husband has agreed to do. Mordecai explains what has happened, sends this urgent request back to Esther to intercede for her people. I mean, can you imagine the shock in Esther's mind? But then she's aware of something that Mordecai couldn't have known. Protocol meant that the king would pick and choose his daily audience. Nobody simply just dropped by or made an appointment. Such an action would lead to death. But you're the queen. Oh, don't think I have any special privileges. It had been a while since the king had called her or made any overtures toward her. Remember, years have passed since Esther made the king swoon. The honeymoon is over. It's not like it was. This is not, I know we turned a page and we think it's the same week. 4 years have gone by. A lot has changed. And Esther she's not the number one doll right now. Now, for those that love the ideas or love to talk about the tension between the sovereignty of God and the responsibility of man, this is another great example. God, in His supervisory, sovereign providence, has clearly orchestrated events to place Esther in this place of influence. She is embedded in the place where this decree has been made. And there's no way, I'm sure every day, don't you think Esther for 4 years has been thinking, how did this happen? This charmed life that I have. I'm just this Jewish orphan. I don't belong here. I'm nobody. I'm from nowhere. I'm not any more this, that, or the other than any other girl. Why am I here? As days would go by and food would be brought to her, and there'd be weeks where she didn't even lift her hands to receive food. It just was brought in choo-choo train into her mouth. I mean, like you do with little babies, like here comes the choo-choo. They would do that with her. But she does not anticipate here that because God has brought her all this way, that He'll just now take care of things, or that she can just act in any way that she wants to. Oh, that's what's happening with the Jews? Well, I'm just going to march in there because God brought me here. She's not going to be a person of presumption. That's what presumption is. Lord, you've put me here, so now I'm going to act any way that I want. And He has to just rubber stamp my actions as if they're His, as if I just have to do this or do this way, and He has to honor it. Well, that's presumption. And she won't be guilty of that. That being said, providence does not negate the need for courage. Esther will still need to jump over the hurdles of her own human self-preserving ethic. Just because God has put people in a certain place and chosen them and told them of all He will do through them, there is still a need for the human person, the representative of God, to expose themselves as courageous individuals that believe in faith that God is doing a work through them. Hearken back in your mind to Moses, burning bush situation, the first Bush administration. And there he is. God is speaking to him through this bush environment, telling him all that He's going to do for him. And what does Moses do? Oh, I don't speak well. Did you not hear what I just said? I am going to speak through you. Your tongue is irrelevant, Moses. I'm going to be the one speaking through you. You get so mad at him finally, look, I'll send Aaron. I don't want to send Aaron, but here he comes. He's going to be your mouthpiece. I was just reading the other day, Ananias, when God told him, go talk to Paul. Go talk to this man Saul. He's over here at this house. And I've shown him all these things he's going to do for my name. Ananias is like, Lord, do you know who you're talking about? Lord, you might not know this, but in the papers yesterday, okay. Peter, blanket comes down with all kinds of bacon. And he's looking at it. Oh, I haven't eaten one thing unclean. Don't call what I've cleansed unclean. 3 times. 3 times Pete needs to see the vision. He still doesn't get it. So providence and our recognition of God putting us in a position of influence somewhere in our life doesn't mean that we don't now also need to be courageous to follow that. To stand and to be a representative and a witness in this place that He's placed us in. I can think of so many other examples of people who've had children when they shouldn't have had children. You're providentially placed as that person's guardian. You shouldn't have gotten the job you have. You were underqualified and there were better people and whatever else, and there you are. Why are you there? You live in a neighborhood you couldn't afford, and there you are. Who put you there? That still requires us to then say, God, now I need to be courageous and step forward and be your representative in all those places. And Esther's being challenged with that right here. You would think, wouldn't you? All these things add up. God, you brought me here. There should be such confidence, but there isn't. She's talking on about, he's got all these other girls and they're younger. They're 4 years younger at least than me right now. And they're better looking and they have all the oil right now. And someone's giving them the lip packs, the whole deal. I don't even have the lip packs anymore. I got to have the old stuff. I buy from the gas station makeup I'm wearing, whatever now. They've got all the good stuff. And I'm not going to walk over there and I'm not going to wow him like I did 4 years ago. I'm 4 years older. I've been eating the king's food and I don't run around a lot. All this stuff is against me, whatever. So all these things are going on in her mind. She hasn't added up that God has put her in this position so that now she can have confidence for the new thing, for the action that's in front of her. And Mordecai is going to talk directly at her about that. Verse 13, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Mordecai is not face to face with Esther. He is communicating through email. By the way, a poor way to communicate when you love somebody. When you love somebody, it's best to communicate face to face. Text is terrible. Email is terrible. But face to face. And right here, Mordecai has only heard what Hathach has said that Esther said. And so he assumes she is being cowardly. She thinks she'll be safe. Don't be fooled, young lady. Remember, he raised her. He raised her. He's thinking right here, no, I know what you're thinking. Don't you think that you're going to be okay because you're in there and we're out here. You cannot neglect to do what is right to save your own skin, Esther. He's telling him, look, you are the one. But you might be tempted, somebody might be tempted at this point, and you might be tempted, okay, Lord, I'm going to put it together. You've put me here. You've brought me into this place. I have this position of influence. I am sovereignly placed, like you said. So it must be that if I don't do it, nothing will happen. That's the opposite side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum is I'm so afraid to do anything because of what might happen. The other side is I'm going to do whatever because if I don't do it, it won't happen. Well, Mordecai makes sure that she doesn't get that attitude. Look at what he says. The words he chooses are quite clever. He tells her, if you are plotting or devising to be silent to save yourself, God will find another way to deliver. You and I are important cogs of a machine, of a piece of machinery in people's lives. Some of us will be on the side that Esther's saying earlier, oh, I can't do it because of this, that, or the other. And if I witness to somebody, they're going to get even more unsaved than they are now. And then there's the other side where I am God's instrument. I'm going in there. I'm going to take spiritual name, and that's I'm going to whatever. If I don't do it, nobody will get saved. It's not true. I am one piece of a redemptive program in someone's life. And if I don't do my job, God loves that person enough to send somebody else at him. He will get his work done one way or the other. Now, for Esther, he says, listen, if you don't participate, here's the blessing. Right now, in this season, at this time, you have the opportunity to participate with God in this redemptive program. You can step into this. Maybe this is why you've been brought to the kingdom this is the whole reason why you're here. And if that's the case, you get to participate in what God's going to do. Otherwise, relief, literally enlargement or space, and a way of escape will come by other means. You may not make it either, Esther, but God's people will be taken care of one way or the other. If you'll be courageous, you'll get to participate in God's work. You'll serve His interests. You will serve His interests in the placement that He has put you in. Esther has to be reminded that God has put her here just for that very reason. This is her time to serve His interests. Friends, can I ask you a question? Where you are, do you recognize a similar aspect that you are where you are for such a time as this? The people that you're surrounded with? You might have a special piece of information, a special way of communication, a piece of truth, a puzzle piece that person may need in their life right now. And that where you are placed, it's not because you're so special. I hate to burst your bubble. It's not because you're so great or special. It's because God has put in you that piece of information that person, group of individuals, fellow employees needs for their redemption. Can I say to you that you are where you are for such a time as this? Nothing has changed with God's people. I remind myself of this every Sunday. I'm here for such a time as this. And I never know who's going to be here, not be here, or if anyone's going to be here. But I always think, Lord, somebody who's here needs to hear this. It's the same thing for you. You're in that class for such a time as this. You're in that neighborhood for such a time as this. You're in that job for such a time as this. You have that internet presence in that group for such a time as this. 4 years have gone by in Esther's life. Why am I here? What have you brought me here for? Hey, Mordecai says through Hathach, for such a time as this. And I say it to you. So verse 15 says, Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, Go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. After hearing this, Esther put her next moves in the hands of God, calling for a fast. I just think about how Esther said this, telling all the Jews, you guys all fast. And all the maidens are like, yeah, they should all fast. And we're going to fast too. Oh, man. No, come on. I don't want to fast. I want to eat. Anyway, we'll fast too. Sure, great, wonderful. But she's going to go against all convention. The worst that can happen is she's going to die. You know, when that's the worst that can happen to you in service to the Lord, you're right on the right track. If all they can do is kill you, it's not so bad. I'm going to be with Jesus if that happens. She knows if she dies, she'll die doing what is right. And for the first time in their relationship, Mordecai does what the queen commanded. He could get all in on prayer and fasting because that's what was necessary. As we close today, the words that we've just read, the story that we've just seen, it's amazing to consider how God is working even when He's not given the credit. What He is doing in your life, whether you see it as significant or not, whether you see your place in life as if it's not spiritual, it's not happening, there's no reason, it's all just happenstance, it's not. God is weaving a plan in your life, and you are who you are, where you are, for His purposes. Maybe He has set you in your place for such a time as this. Well, let me tell you, folks, there's no maybe about that. He has placed you where you are for such a time as this. Now, all the providence and all the understanding of how He's done that, it means nothing if you're not courageous enough to go and say, Lord, now what? How do I act? What shall I do? What is my responsibility? Who do I speak to? What's the worst they can do? Kill me? Most of you might just be unfriended on Facebook. Well, big whoop. If I perish, I perish. May the Lord give you wisdom to follow and to be His voice in your generation, to serve His interests in your time. Let's pray.